This is the Darshan Talks podcast, regulatory guy, irregular podcast with host Darshan Kulkarni. You can find the show on Twitter at Darshan Talks or the show's website at darshantalks.com.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Darshan Talks. I'm your host Darshan Kulkarni. It's my mission to help patients trust the products they depend on. So I'm an attorney, I'm a pharmacist, and I advise companies with FDA-regulated products. So if you have an interest in an FDA-regulated product or the company associated with it, this is the podcast for you. So our guest today has, well, she has a lot of people interested in knowing more about her. I've seen some questions come through. People have been very interested to hear and understand more about our guest. She is the global head of ClinOps for Takeda, and she deals with a lot of rare disease state issues. And I asked her, well, what does that actually mean? What does global head of ClinOps mean? And she came out and said, basically, it's the culmination of my entire professional life, where it was a soup to nuts. What do clinical trials look like? What do they involve? And I get to bring all that together and help patients. So, and I asked her if it's primarily rare disease state patients or others, and she said it's a split of both of those. And so I want to learn more about what that means and what the differences are. So if you are running a clinical trial, if you are looking at patient-centric issues, if you are legal and regulatory and trying to understand what are those people in clinical trials doing, this is the conversation for you. So, ladies and gentlemen, today's guest, Karen Correa. And as you can tell, she is the current Mrs. New Jersey, as you can tell from the sash and the crown behind you. So, and the story behind it is so fun and fascinating. I've already asked her to come back. So just in case you want to know, that story will be coming in the future. So welcome, Karen. Thank you for coming on.
No problem. Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
I'm excited. So let's talk a little bit in general, Karen. So your job, let's talk about what your day-to-day looks like. Tell us a little bit about what does the day of a global head of ClinOps in the time of COVID look like?
Ooh, that's a big talk. Okay, so first of all, as you can imagine, we're in COVID, so we're not face-to-face. We are obviously all doing this from the luxuries of our homes or wherever in your environment that you work from. And so this is a definitely meeting world. We are in meetings from the time we start that morning till the end of that day. And that's important. It's really, really important for everybody to know that we're connecting with each and every one of us. But a day-to-day, we are looking at our clinical trials from the beginning to the end. We're in the planning stages. We're looking at how we're planning our trials. We're looking at patient centricity, how we're making sure that our trials are going to get to the patients that we want to enroll. We want to look at how we're going to enroll those patients, how we're going to keep those patients, how we're going to retain those patients. So we're constantly meeting and prioritizing all of our activities so that everything that we do focuses around what is the best thing for the patient. And then we look at how we're going to execute that. How do we execute from the beginning to the end? What are the things and what are the challenges? And every day there could be a new challenge. It's like life. There's nothing, there's no rock untold that you're going to say, oh, this is just not going to happen. It can happen because it's just like real life. COVID is real life. We're a year into COVID. So in the beginning of COVID, we had, like in any other company, there were studies that had to be halted. There were sites that could not be seen. There were patients that couldn't have visits. So you have to change your business model. So everything was put into place again around the patient. So a day-to-day is constantly looking at how are we putting our trials into place to make sure that they get to the patients and that we're able to execute. That's what every day is like, and that's what every meeting is about. And you're looking at budgets, you're looking at timelines, you're focusing on just execution. And that's not always something that some people want to do. Some people are like, oh my gosh, this is so boring. It's like the paperwork, as my children say, Mom, you do so much paperwork. But at the end of the day, I know that my paperwork is going to help some patient one day. And when this gets approved, someone's life's going to be changed. And so that's how I look at it.
So you focus so much on what you're calling paperwork, what you're calling operations. There are a million questions that pop out of that, but I'm going to start from a more from a question that affects me personally. You're so busy. What you're describing is a very, very busy period. You're relatively new to Takeda compared to some of the other positions you've had. If that's true, do you find yourself going, I felt like I jumped onto a treadmill and I don't have a chance yet to look at strategy? Or are you looking at strategy simultaneously and that's just taking you, I mean, it sounds like operations are so busy. Do you have time to look at strategy?
You do. And one of the things that you learn when you're in the industry, as long as I am, you have to learn to balance. It's unfortunate that some people look like, oh my gosh, you're busy all day long, but that's what we signed up for. It's kind of like, this has been my dream job. And so I'm ready so I have to find that balance of, I'm going to be busy in meetings. I'm going to be busy focusing on issues and escalations and things of that nature, if there are any. But I'm also going to be busy on strategy because, again, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So you have to focus on the planning part of that process. So you can't always be reactive. There's got to be a proactive component to it so that things can change. Because if that, you're doing the same thing over and over. And we know what that means. That's the sign of insanity, to continue to do the same thing over and over and expect a different result. So you have to have a part of that strategy part in there. So it's a balance. And anyone that takes a role in operations, especially a leadership operations role, you have to be ready to roll up your sleeves, get to the table, get to the grind, and know that your day is very focused. And I think that happens when you're able to manage your time. That's just part of the process. But like me, I grew up in ClinOps. So when you grow up in ClinOps, you're used to that timeline of just, okay, I got this meeting, I got 10, 15 minutes, I can focus on this. We are very, very strategic with our time and how to utilize that time effectively.
So you talk about using your time effectively. You've grown up in this world of ClinOps, but I guess my question is, we're always talking about doing things differently. We're talking about decentralized trials right now. We're talking about remote studies right now. We're talking about centralized studies, platform studies, blah, blah, blah. How do you decide what the flavor of the day is that's going to have the FDA still be happy while still optimizing? Like, who are the people you reach out to come up with your ClinOps strategy?
So it's like a village. It takes a village to raise a child. It's like a village that comes to the table. So you have different people. You have your data people that's looking at how is this data going to be, we can actually use. So you have data at the table. You have your patient recruitment and retention team at the table. They're going to be able to bring you all of the vendors. They're going to be able to bring you strategy on your recruitment rate. They're going to be able to bring you strategy on things that would work. You have your operations people on the table. You have your clinical operations manager. You got project managers. They're going to be able to tell you how to operationalize that and how that's going to look if you are working, you're seeing that with working with your vendors that you're working with, maybe your CRO vendor. And then you have your clinical scientific team. There's all of those people. It's not one role. It's all of these roles together coming to a table with a defined focus and making sure that they set a goal of what we're going to leave this meeting focused on. That's how it happens, and it takes time. But what it takes is a good leader. And within my team, I have great clinical operations managers. So I just feel like bringing the right people to the table, bringing everyone to the table, and having everyone's voice be heard on what is the next step. And is everything perfect? It's not. As a matter of fact, there's never going to be anything perfect because we're imperfect. I tell people all the time, you can't take an imperfect person and try to make a perfect situation. No one in this world is perfect. No company's perfect. What I think we're all trying to do is to find that piece of perfection. So that's it. I mean, and I think that, one thing I see having worked at many companies is that when you look at different people and you look at different companies, we all have something that we're doing well and we're all trying to grow. And that's what I look at. Because then some people look at, it's a competitive market, it's whatever. At the end of the day, it is a competitive market on your product. But in the end of the day, there isn't no competition when it comes to saving lives. So at the end of the day, the competition is whose lives can we all save? Just like, that's how I think about with COVID. At the end of the day, we want to save lives.
Right.
Takeda want to save lives. Any other pharmaceutical company, biotech, they want to save lives or, increase, quality of life, whatever the case may be. That's the real competition is beating death. That's to me. That's how I feel.
Which raises two questions for me from there. The first question I have is, when you talked about that core strategy team, if you will, and I recognize that it changes from situation to situation, but what I heard you say is it's often typically an internal team at the sponsors, where you're having this conversation going, what do we want to do to accomplish our goals? And you have resources from external vendors. When is it right to bring in external vendors into that core strategy meeting? Or is there never the right time because that's an internal company perspective?
It depends on the company. It depends on the organization. I can't speak for every company and not specifically speaking for Takeda, but speaking overall as an operations person. It's good to bring in your partner as early as you can, because then that way they're a part of the solution. It's kind of hard it's kind of like being voluntold or being volunteered. If someone voluntold you, says this is what you have to do and you have to do it like this, it's probably not going to be as successful. But if you bring someone to the table at the beginning and say, this is how we're thinking, what are you thinking? And then together we come up with a plan, it's probably going to be more successful. So the great part of partnership is trying to bring on whatever that vendor is, whoever those vendors are, try to bring them on as soon as possible as you can, so that you guys can have that early engagement. And I think that a lot of, even prior companies, I think every company is trying to bring on their vendors at the right time. But sometimes you're still trying to air, how he's like, I don't want to say you trying to air out your own dirty laundry, but sometimes you want to make sure you know exactly what you want before you engage somebody else. You got to kind of know who you are, what you want. And then once you get out, it's like, okay, now let's engage them. And then you bring them on as early as possible so that they can be a part of the solution. And it is, in my prior organizations, I think we've all been doing that. It's just trying to bring the vendors on as soon as possible so that they can be able to be a part of that.
So what I hear you saying there is the right time to bring in the vendors, and it obviously changes in each situation, is once you have clarity of vision of what you want to accomplish, then how you want to accomplish it is what the vendor is going to help you with, generally speaking.
That's a very good point. Yes, but depending on the organization or depending on the situation, you might be in a situation where you might think you have the vision, and maybe that vendor might be able to help you with the vision. Depends on the organization. I've been in small organizations, I've been in large organizations, and I've been in organizations that you might be in a large organization, but you might be new to a certain indication or a new modality or something. So you might, let me just see what their experience is and their knowledge is. No one knows everything. It's so funny. I think about this joke that we used to say, and not that I did this, but you ever heard that saying that if ever in doubt, look about. It's better to cheat than repeat. You ever heard that quote?
I've never heard it, but I like it.
It's like, I know, right? So it just doesn't make sense to why struggle alone with the solution, trying to find a solution when your next door neighbor might have the solution. I mean, that just doesn't make good sense to me. So if you've already found out how to make this work, I have no problem, I have no pride. Well, I will not say, help me out with that. Like that's a good approach. I don't have to agree with it, but it doesn't hurt to at least venture out and listen to it,
So which really raises that other question, right? And the question I'm referring to is a point you raised a few seconds ago, where you said we're imperfect people. We can't aim for perfection by definition. But that raises the question of, well, what is the role of artificial intelligence in clinical research? And there's been a whole bunch of discussion about, can we use artificial intelligence? I mean, Amy Abernathy, as of yesterday's news, I believe, is leaving the FDA. But she was a big proponent of data in decision making and use of data in sort of filling out what we don't know. Do you see a future in the short term? Obviously, in the long term, who knows? But in the short term, where we're going to be able to use more quote unquote perfect methodologies like AI, and then what about the imperfections that the AI itself has, for example, bias?
Right, exactly. That's a very good point. So let's tap on that. First of all, data can speak for itself. I don't want to take the concept away. And I totally believe in artificial intelligence, and I believe in data drives decisions, and I believe data drives good decisions, maybe even well decisions. Perfect decisions, that's something to think about. I'll give you an example. We all talk about we can utilize the perfect data to predict the right country footprint and the right site and the right recruitment rate, and that study's going to go just as planned. Did artificial intelligence tell you that COVID was going to happen and shut down the world?
No, it's
okay.
It's not.
Mm-hmm. Did artificial intelligence tell you that your top PI was going to have a massive heart attack and he is no longer going to be able to practice?
But that's sort of, I guess, I'm agreeing with you 100%. But then the question is, it's based on the data we have, right? So the input of the data decides the output of the data. So if you tell the artificial intelligence that this is the data you need to use, and we consider the risk of a site PI having a heart attack to be
example
7 on a scale of 1 to 10, that's something to consider. But if we internally say it's going to be a 1, maybe the AI won't use it as much. On the other hand, COVID, we'd say the risk of that as of 2010 is negligible at best, but as of 2020, I want you to start including that as a consideration. Is the output of the AI a reflection of our own biases?
I don't want to say it's a reflection. I don't really say it's biases. I think there's the unknown factor. I think that's the part of research. I think that's the whole point of just life itself. There is a humanistic part that is an unknown.
Yeah.
I really believe that data, like I said, data is great and it's going to give you good data in, good data out.
Yeah.
Great data in, great data out. I just don't ever think it's perfect. I don't ever think it's perfected, like it's perfection, like it's absolute. That's the thing. Like that confidence level, you're gonna have that gray area, and then you're gonna have those flukes. There's just those things that are gonna happen that you're gonna be like, I had no idea that was gonna happen. I've been on those types of trials.
Yeah.
I've been on those types of trials. I know that for a fact. So it's not something I'm thinking, it's something I know. And like I said, I really believe, and so that's why I'm like all for it, and I'm all for the data. I just think that people sometimes forget there is a part of life, a part of research that we just don't always, we can't predict for it because it's just so it's unknown. It's just that one little piece that's unknown, but you still should focus on trying to get the best data so that you can have the best outputs or the best results,
So are you saying that there's a role for AI?
Absolutely.
And it'll get better, but it may be better than where we are today, but we can't eliminate the ability of humans to sort of adapt, which AI is less able to do, at least right now.
Correct.
Okay, I just want to make sure I wasn't putting words in your
mouth. No, you're not putting words in my mouth. Absolutely. And you're right, it's constantly changing because the world is constantly changing. We're constantly going through things. I mean, I look at, one topic that's just near and dear to my heart, diversity in clinical trials. That was my master's, that was my PhD dissertation, that's my topic, that's my, I live and breathe it because it's personal. It's very personal. So, but what amazes me is that we have been courting and dating this topic for over 20 years.
Yeah.
We're getting married and committed to this topic. Oh, so now we've got a little bit more, we got some teeth in it, people are like, wow, wait a minute, we might need to pay attention to this. And so we're hoping now it becomes substantial. It's something that it becomes in our DNA, and it's not a nice to have.
Yeah. So let's explore that, because I love the idea of exploring that topic, right? It's we've been talking about diversity in clinical trials since I've been in the industry 20 years ago.
Thank you.
And it's probably predated me by at least another 20 to 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
So the question really is, what does actual action around diversity look like? Because on one hand, we say we want the diversity, but on the other hand, if we go into other countries and try to do studies saying we want a more diverse reflection of population, where does that cross over into you're preying on societies that cannot handle the type of money you're throwing at them? I remember there was a Pfizer study decades and decades ago, but I think you may even be familiar with it when I talk about it. But it was something to the effect of they went into a place in Africa. They told a village elder, look, we'll give you a TV. We want your people to participate because we think that they'd be able to benefit. And what they didn't understand is that the TV at that time what caused the village elder to change an opinion that he or she, well, I guess at this point would be a he, but he probably shouldn't have done in the way he did. And so cultural norms and cultural sensitivity we may be less aware of. So how do we do diversity right, I guess, is a better way to frame that question.
Listen, I'm not gonna sit up here and say I have all the answers by no stretch of the imagination. And there's people that's been doing this for way longer than I have. Way longer. I will definitely want
to be fair though, you have a PhD in this
topic. I want to preface that. But there's one thing that there's just some nuggets there that stand out for me. One is, first of all, have you ever heard about, let's sweep around our own front door before we start going to someone else's house. So what I mean by that is let's diversify our trials here in the U.S. Let's just start there. How about that? Okay. All right. So we had a 13% population of African Americans. How we represent 1% of the population in the clinical trials. Let's work with that before we start saying now we're going to start going to other countries that have Black, African, whatever patients. Yeah. Totally not saying that we should not do that. That's not what I'm saying. But before we start utilizing that as an opportunity, how about we clean up the diversity that's going on here? Yep. We can't even get that right. If we get that right, maybe we can then start thinking about what other countries we can go to look at the diversification and implementing. And something that someone I just look up to with all of my heart. And so Dr. Frida Lewis Hall, she said something that was just profound to me one time when I was working with her. And she said, one of our problems is we continue to try to solve Star Wars problems with Flintstones tools. And I was like, absolutely. So, I love that line. I know, right? I love her. Things just come out. It's perfect. I have so much respect for her. But what I'm saying is you cannot sit up here and continue to keep doing these same tools. I've seen these patient recruitment packages and I'm like, well, I did that when I was a study coordinator in 1993. It's 2021. Come on. Are you kidding me? This is your recruitment package? So that's it. And then, I'm on the board of a federally qualified health center. And of course, 98% of our population is African Americans and Hispanics. So totally understand. It's a challenge with getting people to get to care. And then now you want to try to get them to clinical trials. There's so many dynamics to that. And like I said, again, in the US, I'm talking about the US, I'm talking about real facts. Yeah. We need to focus on those types of factors, and we have the capabilities to do it. Look what we've done with COVID. Granted, there's still some concerns because there's still people who are resistant to get the vaccine, but we've made some marks. We should be proud of those marks. Let's transfer that knowledge into our other trials, and it shouldn't be a nice to have. I don't want to be someone's second thought.
Let's take that point, which is COVID taught us some lessons. Let's apply them. What are some lessons you think we learned in COVID that would help us improve diversity in our clinical trials in 2023?
Awareness and education and access. Always the three things: awareness, education, and access. You could not turn on a TV and not know about what's going on with COVID. Some people people really now know have more knowledge of what a clinical trial is because of COVID. I tell people all the time I do clinical trials in my family. They're like, what's that? What are you talking about? You do clinical trials? What is that? You deal with that? Like, they don't know. I mean, and I'm not knocking them, No. But they don't know. But now people know more about what a clinical trial is, or at least the concept of a clinical trial because of COVID. So, okay, that's called education, all right, or awareness in that spot. Then there's the education piece. We constantly had briefings, we had topics, we had discussions, we had panels, we had experts. So now you've increased that constantly. That's repetition. Oh, now let's talk about access. Let's just talk about at least the vaccination. You've got the drugstores, you got community centers, you got like all these different types of people bringing access, because everybody's not located in the same place. Everybody doesn't have the same access. That's the whole thing with, equality. Equality doesn't work for me and you if I need a different type of access. So it needs to be equitable. So that's where health equity comes in. So if we could just work on those three things in here in the US, we can really move the needle. That's all I'm trying to do. I just want to move the needle a little bit. I want to make sure that all our Black and brown children have the same opportunities as anyone else. I also want to make sure that women have the same access to healthcare that anyone else. I want to make sure that someone who is socioeconomically disadvantaged have the same access as anyone else. Someone who is a second or third language, someone who is an immigrant. If you live here, I want to make sure that you have access to good healthcare and that you have opportunities. And as for clinical trials, I want you to at least know it's an option in your journey to healthcare. Clinical trials is, it's a part of the journey.
So let's take that a little bit further, which is you talk about equity and you talk health equity and you talk about access. Do you see decentralized studies and the idea being part of that solution? Because you go from, you need to drive 2 hours to get to your PI's office where you have access to a clinical study, to go to the local pharmacy. They'll have something for you. And we'll make sure the medication comes to the pharmacy for you, and the pharmacist is the one who dispenses it, or there's a nurse that comes to you. So what does that look like? Talk to me a little bit further about, do decentralized studies help address the problem of health inequity in clinical trials?
Absolutely. Okay, I'm going to use this because I like to give people real stories. Okay, 4 years ago, my sister died of COPD.
Sorry.
10 days later, my father died. I know what life is really about, real stories. My sister, when she had COPD, she lived alone. She was older than me. My sister's older than I am. She lived alone. Now, I would have loved for her to be able to have access to a clinical trial or something, because I knew her COPD was getting worse. But first of all, I live in New Jersey. She lived in North Carolina. First of all, how was she going to get there? My sister was very weak. How was she going to take her tank and all her oxygen, her meds, her purse, get into her car and try to drive to a site to do clinical trials, and then get back home? And then it was just draining for her just to get up every day, before she went to the hospital in her last couple of months of her life. So yes, think about the patient. And that's just her story. I know of stories of people with children, people who are taking care of their elderly. I know people who don't have a car, or they live very far, or they have a job where they can't just take off. I feel like I have a good job with good health insurance, but I'm gonna tell you, I can take off. But do I want to? No, because I don't want to miss this meeting. I'm so busy. I'm so focused on my job and my career. It's hard to take off because I feel like I'm going to miss something. And I think I'm not the only career-driven person that's like, I've missed this mammogram, or I've missed this dinner, my dental appointment. So but you want someone who's a blue-collar person to take off all these days to go to a visit? No, it's not that easy. So you got to make it more accessible for everybody. And when you put yourself in someone else's shoes, then you can truly walk their moccasins. And that's where I think people forget. I think sometimes people sit behind their ivory towers and they write these beautiful documents and these protocols and these processes, and then they're like, that would be great. Sealed and package it on up and say, all right, can't wait to execute this. I used to be a study coordinator. I can tell you, it's not that easy. I did pediatric asthma and allergy trials. And I remember I had one little kid, he was like, oh my gosh, Miss Karen, I love doing this study, but every time I come, I got to get up earlier, and then my mom's got to bring me, and she's got to figure out what to do with my sister, because, and then my sister, then she got to drop my sister off, and it's just so much. And I still love the patients I used to work with, and I just listen to them, and I'm like, wow, this is a lot on this lady. She's got one kid she got to drop off, then bring one kid to the office, and then she's going to drop him back off at school, and then she's then go to work, because most asthma trials, you start them off early in the morning. By the time I did all that, I'd be like, I'm done, I'm calling out.
Yeah.
I'd be calling out. We don't think like that. We think it's so simple. But that's real life. That's real life.
What really jumped out at me when you said that was the idea that the woman said, I really like being part of this clinical trial, but, and she talks about all the reasons why it's difficult. One of the things that really jumps out at me is the history of inequities that we've especially seen in the context of clinical trials. And what I'm really referring to are the Tuskegee experiments and the legacy. I love that I've
you know you're about to get it, right?
Was
there
that?
was just an article about recently about that. So I'm
giving it to you in a few seconds to just get into it. Because the truth is, we want people to be part of these clinical trials. We want them to participate and benefit from these studies. But we have a history of doing this wrong as a nation and as an industry. So the truth and trust in the industry is at an all-time low. How do we do it better? How do we address our own failures before we try to say we're in this for you?
All right. The first thing is, I had the opportunity to be down in the wonderful area of Tuskegee, and there was a man that stood up on the stage and he talked about the history, and he said the Tuskegee trials. And there was a lady in the audience who taught there for years who was retired. And she said, sir, I would like to correct you. First of all, please stop saying Tuskegee trials. They were not Tuskegee trials. They were government trials conducted at Tuskegee. So that was the first thing. We need to start thinking about the way we say things, because, you know, they carry that badge, and that's not a badge they should be carrying, because it was just conducted there. They just happened to be the vessel that weren't their trials. So just one of those little things that, you know, I make sure I'll never say again. But you're right. I don't even think that's really what people are disadvantaged at, or they're listening to, or they're hearing today. Let's talk about the today biases that people are dealing with. Like, let's talk about that. You don't even have to go back that far. Let's go to the patients that are currently in, you know, seeing physicians right now and don't want to, you know, refer them to another doctor because they feel like they might lose them. Let's talk about that, you know, inequity. Let's talk about the doctor that might feel like, oh, this patient is not good for a clinical trial because they might not be compliant, making a, you know, inference, or they just have this, you know, institutional bias about a certain group or a stereotype. Let's talk about the people where I have heard people say, well, if I start looking at different types of investigators, you know, I might have to be concerned about the quality of the data, you know, don't want to, you know, diversify the investigator pool. Let's talk about current stuff. You don't have to go back to the trials that the government did at Tuskegee. We could talk about some of them injustices that's happening today. So we don't got to go back that far. And as long as we continue to still have those situations, we're going to continue to still have those issues. But the good thing is we have a lot of people that are on the stage to say enough is enough, and we are going to change things. We're going to make sure that women are at the table and make sure that women are included in the decisions. We're going to make sure that minorities are at the table and they're included in the decision. We're going to make sure that LGBTQ, I can't even talk now, community is at the table. When you have all of those groups at the table, then they're going to be a part of the solution. As Shirley Chisholm say, you know, as they say, if you're not at the table, or Elizabeth Warren, then you're on the menu. And if you don't have a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. So we need to have everybody at the table. We can't leave anybody out. Because again, I don't want people to get confused that when I say diversity, that I'm only speaking of a minority community. When I speak of diversity, I'm talking about every situation.
Yeah. So, but that's, to me, sorry for a second, I heard a reverb. To me, what's interesting about what you just said, and I'm well over time, but this is such a great conversation. I'm gonna challenge you, and I'm gonna argue that they're two different discussions you're having. The first is you talk about the inequities in terms of the doctor saying, you know what, I have a bias against these groups of individuals for whatever reason. where the industry, and I'm going to include doctors in that industry because they're the ones doing the studies. But when I was referring to the government trials at Tuskegee, as one might say, I think that was a failure where the patients or the subjects lost trust in the industry. I see that as two separate sides of possibly the same coin, but they're two separate problems that result from the same issue of we view certain people as not needing a seat at the table, or that their voice is subsumed in the conversations we're already having. So I like to believe that people are not intentionally going, I don't want to hear your voice. It's more, I don't think your voice can add something that we don't already have included.
Oh, that's the point. Yeah, I can see that. I can see that, but you don't know that until you bring the voice to the table, correct?
Unless you think that you've already heard those voices. But the question is, I don't know. I don't think that's correct. And a really good example of that is the entire movement around patient centricity, where we thought we had all the answers.
Right.
And patients came in and said, "No, you don't. You're
not
doing this right."
Okay, good point. But it's evolving though too.
Yeah.
You might have had the right answer at that point, but it changes. Yeah. I mean, listen. Okay, just think of parenting. Okay,
yeah.
I have 5 adult children, blended family, but 5 adult children. What might have worked for one child might not work for the next child. Yeah. So that's the whole thing with patient centricity. It's constantly evolving.
Yeah.
You have to you gotta listen. You gotta keep up with things. You can't be again. Rita said it perfectly. You just gotta keep evolving, and that's the piece. I think that the whole thing with patient centricity. It's not going to be stagnant. You're not going to have a bow on it, have a playbook, and we're going to do this, and this is going to work for every clinical study I conduct. That is not what's going to happen. AI, it's going to constantly have new information that's going to come in, that's going to change, that's going to impact your outcomes. And that's what I think that our industry has to constantly do. We have to constantly learn more, listen more, be a part of it more. And that's what I love about pharma and Transcelerate and all of these Tough Center. They're constantly gathering data. They're bringing all of us together so that we can listen to one another, so that we can grow. And that's iron sharpens iron. This pharma company can help that pharma company, and this patient group can help that patient group. That's how we're going to all get better. When we work together and really put patients at the center of our decisions, all of us, then we all win.
I love that as an ending line, and I'm very hesitant to say this, but I just have to be quippy about this because I'm an idiot sometimes. And the quippy line is, you said you have a blended family with 5 kids. And I've always heard about this argument. The oldest one gets all the special treatment. And I say this as the youngest kid in my family, but or at least the youngest kid of my parents. But the oldest one gets all the special treatment because it's the first time you're having a kid. By the time you get to kid number 5, you're going, look, you're an autopilot. You should have this figured out. We know this thing. Is patient centricity or diversity suffering from that same exact problem, which is, we've done studies forever. We've got this down. Don't worry your pretty little head about this because we got this. Is that the exact same problem we have?
I don't know. I think, to be honest with you, I think diversity, patient centricity, I think what is struggling from is that because no one has the true answer, people are just tired. I think people get, they feel like it's financially burdened. They just have all types of reasons. And I'm not here to judge anybody. I just think you get tired, especially when you work really hard. And what I don't think people see behind, and this is one thing I hope the world can see in the pharma industry, in the biotech industry, there are people working day in and day out on their trials, whatever their indication, whatever their drug is, their vaccine, whatever it is, they're working really hard. And when it gets to the finish line and it doesn't cross over, that is so demotivating. They don't see all of that hard work. It's like the iceberg. Everybody just sees all of the ones that get approved or whatever. They don't see all of the work down here. They don't see the late night meetings, the reviews, the documents, the data cleaning. They don't see all of that. So people get, they get exhausted. And then our industry gets so bashed we get so bashed, and it's so hard. I hate when I meet with people, and I sometimes don't even tell people I work for the pharma industry because I don't like for people to hear the negativity. I love what I do, and I love the people I work with.
Yeah.
And we get such a negative feedback so much. I want to help us change the dynamics. We are so there for every patient. We want to save lives. Doesn't always work that way. So I just think people get exhausted and they get burned out. And so maybe sometimes the innovation leaves the door because of that. It's not intentional. It really isn't.
So before we go further, because we can have a whole discussion on patient centricity.
I know, right?
And continue our conversation on diversity and get into CRO relationships and talk about everything else we talked about. But here's a really simple question. What is a question you'd like to ask our audience that you'd like answered from them?
How can we work better together as an industry? That's it. We're COVID showed us we got to work together.
Yeah,
we are competing, and I get that, and I respect that. I mean, I work, we all, but we also are working together at the same time. Does that make sense? It's kind of like a track meet. You got the relay team, okay? That everybody's got to work together, to win the relay. But then when you're running the 400 or 300 or whatever, you're running by yourself then. But you also got to run with the team. So to me, I see the pharma industry as the relay team. We got to pass the baton, we got to work together. But then I know that we also got our own lanes that we have to, work on our own drugs, work on our own, and we have to, make that get to the finish line, as we expected and so forth. And I respect that. But we also got to work together. And that's just all, I think is where we're going to change as an industry so that people see the pharma industry as a part of healthcare and not as, you cost too much and all of these other negative things. And I think that until they see us as a unified front working together, that's how we're going to continue to be portrayed.
I love that we have a response from someone going Transcelerate is that answer.
I agree. It's not the answer, but it's one of the solutions because again, I don't think one all be all, but I agree. I'm with you on the Transcelerate. So thank you for that answer.
So during this podcast, as we discussed, we talked a little bit about what your role is like on a day-to-day basis. We talked about the use of AI. We talked about the day in the life of Karen Correa. We talked about the fact that there are how you plan strategy. We talked about diversity in clinical trials. We talked about the beginning of patient centricity. Well, we talked that we wanted to talk about patient centricity, really, because there's so much more we can get into.
So much.
Did I miss anything else?
No, it was a lot, but it was all great topics. It was all great topics, and there's so many more things. Like I said, I give credit to all of the men and women that I've worked with in the past, and all of the men and women that I work with now at my company, which I love, and all the men and women that I will work with in the future. Because what I've learned in this industry, it's very small. So you see people that you pass by them, same company, different company, same conference, different conference. So I look forward to those continued relationships and us working together as an industry to change the dynamics of who we are.
That's a great line. So nothing in this podcast, this is the lawyer in me coming out, should be construed as legal or clinical advice of any kind. It does not necessarily represent Karen or my personal opinion. These are, or the opinions of our employers. Nope. In my case, it does because I'm a lawyer and that's what I do, but still. But that's not necessarily the case with Karen. It is for educational and entertainment purposes only. For those of you who missed it, Karen, where can they reach you?
Oh my gosh. I'm obviously LinkedIn, Correa. And I'm really, really big and active on, believe it or not, Facebook and Instagram. So Karen Smith Correa or Karen 804. So, or Mrs. New Jersey International 2020. I don't know. whatever you can find me, just find me. But at the end of the day, I'm looking forward to meeting more people, learning more, because I have a lot still to learn as a person and as an operations person.
And if you like this podcast, please leave a comment, please subscribe. You can find me at Darshan Talks on Twitter, or you can just go to my website at darshantalks.com. Karen, thank you so much for coming on. This was wonderful.
No problem. Thank you for having me. This was awesome. I really liked it. So it was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is the Darshan Talks podcast. Regulatory guy, irregular podcast with host Darshan Kulkarni. You can find the show on Twitter at Darshan Talks or the show's website at darshantalks.com.